The Ottoman Empire, a world of grandeur and unimaginable cruelty. Behind its golden walls, punishment was terror made flesh. Eye gouging, flesh torn, vision lost, screams echoing. Public floggings, scorching irons, the rack, each act a message. Defiance will cost you everything. The Ottoman Empire, vast and unyielding, stretched across continents, its cities alive with the hum of trade, the murmur of prayers, and the echo of footsteps on marble floors. Palaces glimmered in the sun, adorned with gold and intricate mosaics, minarets piercing the sky as if to challenge the heavens themselves. Markets overflowed with spices, silks, and rare treasures from distant lands, yet beneath this dazzling surface, shadows lurked. Fear, discipline, and brutality thrived alongside beauty and power, a reminder that even in greatness, darkness was never far away. In one such city, narrow streets twisted like veins through the stone heart of the empire, alive with the scent of roasted meats, wet earth, and incense. Here lived Adam, a boy of 17, whose life was defined by both servitude and survival. His family, once minor merchants, had fallen into obscurity when the empire's merciless system of taxes and favoritism swallowed their wealth. Adam moved silently among the crowd, small enough to be overlooked, yet keenly observant. Every glance, every whisper, every flash of a sword drew his attention. In these streets, ignorance was dangerous, knowledge was survival. Adam's mornings began with the distant clang of bells from the Sultan's palace, the rhythm of power itself. He worked as an apprentice to a craftsman who repaired doors and gates of the city's elite, a position that allowed Adam glimpses of wealth he could never possess. Gold, fine fabrics, and delicate carvings danced in his eyes every day, reminders of a life that seemed both near and impossibly far. Yet, it was not desire alone that drew him to these wonders. It was curiosity, the same curiosity that would one day bring him to the edge of terror. The city was alive with hierarchy, and Adam had learned its invisible rules well. The soldiers of the Janissaries strode through the streets with boots that echoed authority, their eyes sharp and unforgiving. Merchants bowed when officials passed, their hands pressed to chests, lips whispering silent prayers. Beggars and thieves knew to vanish before the shadow of the palace guard fell upon them. And Adam, a mere apprentice, understood instinctively that one misstep, one wrong glance could change a life forever. It was in this world of rigid order and hidden cruelty that Adam first became aware of the empire's darker side. He had seen punishments, brief glimpses at first, almost accidental. A man whipped in the square for stealing bread. A woman dragged by soldiers for speaking out of turn. Whispers of even graver fates floated through the markets, chilling the air. The rack, the branding iron, the infamous eye gouging. The stories were hushed, but the fear they inspired was louder than any shouted decree. Adam had always been cautious, careful to observe and blend. Yet the cruelty around him awakened a sense of both dread and fascination. Each act of punishment was a lesson etched in blood. The empire demanded obedience, and the cost of defiance was absolute. And still, he could not look away. There was something human, something tragically compelling about the faces of the condemned. Eyes wide, hearts pounding, life suspended between hope and oblivion. He returned home each night to his small, dim apartment, a space shared with his mother and younger sister Layla. The walls were thin and the cries from the city often seeped through, haunting their dreams. Layla slept in fear, clutching a worn doll, while Adam lay awake, thinking of the world beyond the door. Their mother, once vibrant and resilient, now moved with a quiet resignation, her eyes carrying the weight of survival in a city that demanded it. She reminded Adam constantly, "Do not provoke the eyes of power, my son. They see everything." Yet Adam's life was not merely survival. It was curiosity, a hunger for understanding. He listened to the stories of the elders, tales of past, glories and punishments of justice and injustice intertwined. Each account painted the empire as a living entity, magnificent yet monstrous, capable of generosity and cruelty in the same breath. These stories shaped his mind, seeded both fear and awe. He knew the streets, the markets, the palaces. and even the shadowed alleys where no light penetrated held secrets that could either protect him or destroy him. One afternoon, Adem ventured near the central square where a punishment had been scheduled. He moved cautiously, hiding in the crowd as soldiers prepared their instruments of torment. The air was thick with anticipation, the murmurs of spectators creating a tense, almost ritualistic rhythm. Even from a distance he could see the condemned, a man accused of theft, his hands bound, eyes wide with terror. The crowd hushed as the first lash fell. The sound cut through the air, a sharp punctuation that silenced whispers. Adam's stomach turned, yet he could not look away. The man's screams, mingled with the cracking whip, were a brutal symphony of suffering, a performance of the Empire's unyielding power. In that moment, Adam realized the terrifying truth. The Ottoman justice system was not only about punishment, it was about fear, control, and spectacle. Every act, every lash, every scream was designed to etch obedience into the minds of the living. And for Adam, it was also a lesson, one that he could not ignore. Fear had become education, cruelty a curriculum, and the streets of the Empire were the classroom. That night, Adam returned home with a newfound awareness, the echoes of the day's events following him like a shadow. He sat by the window, looking out at the city bathed in the silver glow of the moon. The streets, once familiar, now seemed alive with hidden dangers, with eyes watching, waiting, and judging. He felt both small and significant, a single life, in the vast machinery of the Empire, yet intimately connected to every whisper, every act, every secret fear that passed through the city. Adam's story, like the Empire itself, was one of contrasts. Beauty and horror, power and helplessness, survival and curiosity. And as the city slept, he could sense that his life was on the brink of change. The shadows of the Empire were closing. In and soon, he would be forced to confront the darkness that had always loomed at the edges of his existence. The sun rose sluggishly over the city, casting long, uneven shadows across the cobblestones. Adam moved quietly through the streets, the memory of yesterday's punishment still vivid in his mind. The smell of iron and blood lingered, a ghost that clung to every corner. Merchants called out their wares, but Adam barely noticed the colors and scents he had once loved. The city was alive, yes, but now it pulsed with a darker rhythm, a rhythm dictated by fear. In the markets, whispers of injustice circulated like invisible currents. A spice seller had been beaten the day before for shortchanging a nobleman, and an entire block had gathered to watch the spectacle. Adam observed silently from the shadows, his heart a tight knot. He had learned early that witnessing such acts was a lesson in survival. The Empire demanded attention to cruelty, lest one fall victim to it. Adam's path led him to the outskirts of the Grand Palace, where guards patrolled with a precision that bordered on ritual. Each soldier's step was a warning, each gaze a reminder of the Empire's omnipresence. Adam ducked behind a pillar, watching as a servant was dragged across the courtyard for speaking too loudly in the presence of an official. The servant's eyes pleaded for mercy, but there was none to be found. The air was thick with tension, every spectator holding their breath as punishment was carried out with surgical efficiency. It was in moments like these that Adam felt the Empire's true power, not in its palaces or its armies or its wealth, but in its ability to turn fear into obedience. Every act of cruelty was a lesson written in blood, a curriculum in terror. And Adam, though young and powerless, could not turn away. The spectacle was irresistible, horrifying as it was, and it etched itself into his memory. Back at his small home, Adam found little comfort. His mother's eyes held worry that words could not convey, and Layla's questions were innocent yet piercing. "Why do they hurt people like that, Adam?" she asked, clutching her doll. Adam had no answer. The world he lived in had no simple explanations, only survival and observation. He held his sister close, feeling the fragility of their existence pressing down on him. As days turned into weeks, Adam became increasingly aware of the subtle injustices that pervaded every layer of the city. Racial hierarchies and social divisions dictated every interaction. Certain ethnicities were treated with suspicion, forced to live in crowded quarters, and denied access to the wealth and education others took for granted. Adem observed merchants, scholars, and guards alike treating some with disdain, others with privilege, all dictated by ancestry, status, or appearance. The young apprentice's awareness deepened when he befriended Hassan, a boy from a nearby district who had been born into a lower caste. Hassan had scars on his arms and back, marks of punishments endured simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. His stories were grim, filled with accounts of whippings, public humiliation, and worse. Adem listened, horrified, yet captivated, realizing that the Empire's cruelty was not random, it was systematic. The punishments, the fear, the oppression were tools of control, wielded expertly by those in power. One evening, Adem and Hassan ventured to a quiet corner near the river, away from the city's prying eyes. The water reflected the pale moonlight, her fragile mirror of calm in a world otherwise dominated by chaos. Hassan spoke of the injustices he had endured, his voice low but intense, each word carrying the weight of lived suffering. Adem felt a surge of empathy, a mixture of anger and helplessness. He understood then that his own life, though precarious, had been spared only by circumstance, by luck, by his ability to blend into the shadows. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant scream, sharp and raw, cutting through the night like a blade. Both boys froze, listening as the sound echoed through the city streets. It was a cry of despair, the unmistakable signature of someone caught in the Empire's machinery of punishment. Adem's stomach twisted. He had heard such screams before, but never this close, never with the realization that the next victim could be anyone, including him or Hassan or Layla. The next days brought further signs of the Empire's merciless justice. Soldiers rounded up men and women accused of minor infractions, dragging them through the streets with chains that clanked against stone. Adem witnessed a shopkeeper publicly flogged for selling substandard spices. The crowd was silent, faces tense with fear, unwilling to intervene. Even those who might feel sympathy were paralyzed by the possibility of being next. Adem understood that fear was the Empire's most potent weapon. It did not merely punish, it commanded obedience before the act even began. Amidst this turmoil, Adem's curiosity grew. He observed every detail, the way the soldiers moved, the expressions of the condemned, the subtle signals exchanged between officials. Knowledge became his armor. He realized that understanding the Empire's mechanisms of fear could, perhaps, offer a sliver of protection. Yet with each lesson, the weight of moral conflict pressed heavier. How could one survive, thrive, or even resist in a world so meticulously designed to break spirits? Even in the small moments, the injustices were glaring. Adem saw children forced into labor, families evicted for failing to meet tax quotas, and elders humiliated for speaking truths, inconvenient to the authorities. The systemic oppression was inescapable, woven into the very fabric of daily life. Adem could no longer view the Empire as a distant spectacle of power. It was alive in every interaction, every corner, every heartbeat of the city. One evening, Adem ventured closer to the central square, drawn by an inexplicable mix of fear and fascination. A new punishment was underway, and he watched from the shadows. A man accused of theft was brought forward, chains clinking ominously. The crowd gathered, faces pale, eyes wide. The method of punishment was something Adem had never seen before. The condemned was to endure the bastinado, a brutal beating of the feet designed to cripple yet prolong suffering. Each strike landed with bone-jarring precision, the victims' cries rising into the night, merging with the distant bells of the palace. Adem's stomach churned, his mind racing. This was more than cruelty. It was a statement of absolute power. That night, Adem returned home, haunted. Layla's questions were silent this time, her eyes wide as she sensed the tension clinging to him. Their mother said nothing, but her gaze conveyed all that words could not: the fragility of life, the permanence of fear, and the ever-present shadow of punishment. Adem lay awake, replaying the day's events, feeling the grip of dread tighten around his chest. He understood, with a clarity that was almost unbearable, that the Empire's cruelty was inevitable, pervasive, and indiscriminate. And yet, within this darkness, a spark of defiance flickered. Adam realized that awareness, observation, and understanding were the first steps toward navigating, surviving, and perhaps one day challenging the Empire's merciless system. But for now, survival demanded caution, silence, and a keen eye for the shadows. The city, alive with beauty and horror alike, held secrets that could both save and destroy. As Part 2 closes, Adam is perched on the edge of change. The injustices he has witnessed, the systemic cruelty he has internalized, and the fear that saturates every street corner all point toward an inevitable disruption. Something is coming, an event that will shatter the fragile balance of his life and thrust him directly into the Empire's machinery of terror. Days turned into weeks, and the city seemed to grow darker, as if the very stones of its streets absorbed the fear and cruelty that echoed through them. Adam moved like a shadow, cautious yet observant, his eyes scanning every alley, every corner, every face. The memories of punishments he had witnessed, the whippings, the bastinado, the cries of the condemned, haunted him relentlessly. Yet life demanded that he continue. The workshop still required his hands, Layla needed his protection, and his mother needed his strength. It was a morning like any other when the catalyst struck. Adam had been delivering repaired doors to a wealthy merchant in the heart of the city, a place where gold glinted under the sunlight and marble floors reflected the opulence of the Empire. He carried the wooden panels carefully, aware of the watchful eyes of palace guards and merchant overseers alike. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Survival demanded perfection, but perfection was a fragile shield. As he passed through the central square, a sudden commotion shattered the routine. Soldiers pushed their way through the crowd, their boots clanging against the cobblestones like thunder. A man had been accused of theft, a petty crime in the Kyo. Eyes of some, yet in the eyes of the Empire, it was an offense that demanded spectacle. The accused was dragged forward, bound and trembling, eyes wide with terror. Adam's stomach twisted as he recognized the executioner's tools, a series of cruel devices, each designed to inflict maximum suffering. The crowd's murmurs grew to a tense silence, punctuated only by the sharp clang of iron and the man's desperate cries. Adam felt a chill run down his spine. The Empire's justice was precise, methodical, and merciless. And yet, amidst the chaos, Adam noticed something unusual. The man's eyes met his for a brief, fleeting moment. In that instant, Adam understood the universality of fear, the shared humanity of those trapped in the Empire's machinery. The punishment began. Every strike, every crack, every scream reverberated through the square, embedding itself in Adam's consciousness. He pressed himself against the shadowed wall, heart pounding, realizing that knowledge alone would not protect him from the Empire's wrath. The lesson was brutal, immediate, and unforgettable. The Empire spared no one, and cruelty could descend upon anyone at any moment. As the crowd dispersed, Adam felt a pull toward the outskirts of the square, where he noticed a young boy, no older than Layla, being shoved to the ground by a guard. The boy's face was etched with terror, his small hands raised in futile defense. Adam's instincts surged. He wanted to intervene, to shield the child from harm, but the presence of armed soldiers made hesitation a matter of life and death. The moment passed, but the image stayed, an indelible imprint of innocence violated by a system built on fear. Returning home, Adam found his mother pacing, her eyes dark with worry. Layla clutched her doll tighter than ever, silent yet sensing the tension that now permeated their home. Adam tried to speak, to offer comfort, but the words felt hollow. The city had changed in his eyes. The streets that once seemed bustling and alive now appeared as corridors of menace, each shadow a potential threat, each glance a possible accusation. That evening, Adam received word from Hassan, his friend and confidant. Hassan had learned of a new decree from the palace, stricter punishments, harsher surveillance, and a mandate that anyone caught speaking out of turn or stepping beyond there. Assigned roles would face immediate and public retribution. The decree was both a warning and a weapon, a reminder that fear was the Empire's primary instrument of control. Adam's mind raced. He realized that his own actions, however small or innocent, could now carry unforeseen consequences. Every movement, every glance, every choice was under scrutiny. The fragile balance that had allowed him to survive thus far was cracking. He could no longer remain a passive observer. The catalyst had set events into motion that demanded response, attention, and strategy. The next days were a blur of tension and vigilance. Adam noticed subtle changes in the city. Neighbors whispering behind closed doors, children instructed to stay silent, merchants hiding their goods and expressions alike. Even the streets themselves seemed different, as if the Empire's eyes had grown sharper, more vigilant. Fear had become omnipresent, seeping into every corner of life, every shadow of existence. And then, the moment that would forever alter, Adam's life arrived. A misstep, a small, almost insignificant error, brought him directly into the path of the Empire's wrath. While delivering materials to a client, Adam accidentally knocked over a container of fine ceramics. The crash, echoing through the workshop like a cannon. The merchant, already anxious under the watchful gaze of a nearby guard, cried out in accusation. Soldiers stormed the scene, dragging Adam into the square, the murmuring crowd gathering once more. Adam's heart pounded as he faced the consequences of a simple mistake, magnified by a system designed to punish without mercy. The tools of justice, chains, scourges, and devices of terror, were prepared with meticulous care. The crowd, sensing the unfolding drama, pressed in closer, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear. Adam understood with sudden clarity that his life had shifted irreversibly. Yet within him a spark ignited. The terror, the injustice, and the pervasive fear no longer simply paralyzed him. Adam began to understand that knowledge, awareness, and resilience were his only weapons. The catalyst event had thrown him into the Empire's machinery of cruelty, but it had also awakened a determination to navigate, endure, and perhaps, one day, challenge the system that threatened to consume him. As night fell, Adam was released. Temporarily, a small mercy, perhaps, or a calculated move by the authorities to prolong the suspense. He returned home, bruised but alive, his mind racing with strategies, fears, and uncertainties. Layla's eyes searched his face for reassurance, and Adam realized that survival was no longer a matter of observation alone. It required action, courage, and an understanding of the darkness that governed every street, every alley, every human heart in the Empire. The setup now reaches its conclusion. Adam's world has irrevocably changed. The Empire's cruelty has touched him personally. The injustices are undeniable, and the tension that has been building will now surge into the rising action. The stage is set. Adam stands at the threshold of danger, his future uncertain, his choices critical, and the shadows of the Ottoman Empire closing in around him. The days following Adam's brush with the Empire's machinery of punishment were suffused with tension, the air thick with the scent of fear. Each step he took through the city streets felt charged, heavy with the knowledge that the Empire's gaze was never far, never forgiving, never blind. The memory of chains, whippings, and screaming victims clung to him like a second skin. Every time a guard passed, Adam felt the pressure of unseen eyes, the weight of inevitable judgment pressing upon him. The city itself seemed transformed. Narrow alleys twisted into ominous corridors, marketplaces buzzed with muted whispers instead of lively chatter, and even the laughter of children held an undercurrent of caution. Adam observed it all with heightened awareness. Survival had demanded vigilance before, but now it demanded something deeper: calculation. He began to notice patterns in the cruelty, subtleties in the enforcement of justice. Every minor infraction, he witnessed every reprimand, every punishment, was a thread in a web of fear, meticulously spun to ensnare any who dared challenge its reach. One afternoon, Adam ventured to the workshop as usual, attempting to maintain the semblance of routine. But the Empire had other plans. A young boy, barely 10, had been caught stealing bread from a market stall. Soldiers dragged him through the streets, the child's wails echoing off stone walls, mixing with the murmurs of a horrified crowd. Adam's stomach twisted. He wanted to intervene, to step forward, but instinct and fear held him back. He felt the helplessness of watching innocence crushed under the weight of authority, and yet he could not look away. It was in moments like these that Adam's internal conflict deepened. He understood survival demanded obedience, yet his conscience bristled against the injustice surrounding him. The Empire's cruelty was precise, surgical even, and he realized that understanding its mechanisms could protect him, but at the cost of his own morality. Each act of punishment he witnessed became a lesson in fear, but also a lesson in empathy, in outrage, in the human cost of power wielded without conscience. Adam's friend Hassan became an increasingly important presence during this period. Hassan had learned to navigate the shadows, to read the city like an open book, to understand where danger lurked and how to avoid it. Together, the boys observed the punishments, memorized the routines of guards, and shared stories of survival. Hassan's own scars and experiences made Adam's observations more acute. The injustices they witnessed were no longer abstract. They were personal, imminent, and terrifyingly real. One evening, they came across a woman accused of insubordination. She had spoken against an official, her words deemed disrespectful and dangerous. Soldiers seized her, dragging her to the public square. Adam and Hassan followed at a distance, hearts pounding, as the crowd gathered to witness the spectacle. The punishment was severe. She was lashed with a whip, each strike landing with a terrifying rhythm that echoed in Adam's ears. Her cries, filled with both pain and defiance, imprinted themselves on his memory. For Adam, it was more than fear. It was awakening, a realization that injustice could strike anyone, at any time. As the days continued, Adam's awareness of the Empire's machinery deepened. He observed patterns of racial and social discrimination with stark clarity. Those born into lower classes or different ethnicities were targeted with disproportionate punishment. The Empire's justice system was not blind. It was deliberate, hierarchical, and often cruelly arbitrary. Adam saw merchants humiliated for minor mistakes, scholars stripped of their privileges for speaking truth, and entire families punished for the actions of a single member. The lessons were relentless, the fear omnipresent. In the midst of this tension, Adam began to notice subtle signs of resistance, small acts of defiance, whispers of rebellion, clandestine meetings in shadowed corners, each one risky, each one dangerous. Yet for Adam, these acts were a lifeline, a reminder that even in the Empire's suffocating grip, the human spirit persisted. He realized that courage was measured not only in grand gestures, but also in surviving the daily cruelties of life under oppression. One day, Adam witnessed a particularly harrowing punishment. A man accused of embezzlement was brought into the square, bound to a wooden frame. The crowd gathered, tense and silent, as the man was subjected to a method Adam had only heard of in whispered tales. The iron chair, its heated metal burning flesh, designed to inflict excruciating pain slowly, prolonging terror and suffering. The man screamed, convulsed, and eventually fell silent, his body a testament to the Empire's capacity for cruelty. Adam's hands trembled, his chest tight with both fear and rage. He realized that knowledge and vigilance were no longer enough. To survive, he needed courage, strategy, and perhaps even alliances he had not yet considered. The young apprentice's world was no longer limited to observation. The injustices he saw were now personal. Families he had known, friends, and even strangers were swept into the Empire's machinery of punishment. Each act he witnessed reinforced the stakes, magnifying both his fear and his understanding. He began to map the city in his mind, not streets, buildings, or markets, but the flow of power, the places where cruelty struck hardest, and the pockets where one might move unseen. Yet even as fear dominated, Adam's empathy grew stronger. He found himself assisting those in need, offering small comforts, guiding the vulnerable through the shadows. These acts of quiet defiance, though minor, gave him a sense of agency amidst the overwhelming oppression. But each act was risky. The Empire's eyes were everywhere, and one misstep could draw him into the very machinery of punishment he had witnessed too many times to forget. The weeks passed, each day a relentless cycle of observation, fear, and quiet resistance. Adam began to notice that the city itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The streets, the squares, the palaces, all were interconnected in a network of control, surveillance, and punishment, and within this network, he had become acutely aware of his own vulnerability. One wrong glance, one misjudged step, could transform him from observer to victim in an instant. By the end of this period, Adam was no longer the cautious boy who had walked the streets weeks earlier. The catalyst event had transformed him. Fear had sharpened his senses, deepened his empathy, and forced him to confront the complexities of survival in a cruel, hierarchical system. He had begun to understand that the Empire's cruelty was not random. It was deliberate, systemic, and designed to crush the human spirit. But he also realized something else. Knowledge, courage, and resilience could be weapons, subtle though they might be. The rising action of his life had begun, an escalation that would test every facet of his being, body, mind, and soul. The stage was now set for the conflicts, dangers, and moral dilemmas that would drive him into the Empire's darkest corners, toward the climax where fear, injustice, and courage would collide. The city seemed smaller now, its streets and alleys constricting like a cage around Adam. Each day brought new reminders of the Empire's unyielding power, guards patrolling with precision, merchants whispering about fresh decrees, and punishments unfolding in the squares, like grim theater. Adam felt the weight of inevitability pressing upon him. The world he had once observed with cautious curiosity had transformed into a labyrinth of danger, where a single misstep could lead to unimaginable suffering. Adam's interactions became more cautious. He avoided certain markets, passed down side alleys to avoid the gaze of patrolling soldiers, and maintained silence in places where conversation had once been safe. Yet, the pull of injustice was irresistible. He could not ignore the suffering. He saw nor could he disengage from the networks of fear and cruelty that defined the Empire's streets. Each act of oppression, each punishment, was a lesson etched in flesh and memory, compelling him to both survive and understand. One morning, Adam witnessed an incident that would haunt him for weeks. A scholar, renowned for his knowledge and integrity, had been accused of sedition. Soldiers dragged him into the central square, his books scattered across the cobblestones. The crowd gathered, eyes wide, faces pale with fear and fascination. The scholar's punishment was brutal, a combination of flogging and confinement in a heated cell designed to break both body and spirit. Adam's stomach churned as he observed every detail, each lash, each cry, imprinting itself in his memory. He understood that resistance, knowledge, or moral courage alone could not protect one from the Empire's relentless machinery. Amidst this escalating terror, Adam found solace in small acts of defiance and quiet strategy. He began to map the city's patterns of punishment, noting which streets were most dangerous at specific times, which officials were most ruthless, and where the vulnerable could hide. These observations became his shield, a form of silent resistance that required constant vigilance and intelligence. Hassan, ever his ally, assisted in these efforts, providing insights from his own experiences of oppression and survival. Together, they navigated the shadows, learning the Empire's rhythms and exploiting small gaps in its control. Yet the risks were growing. Adam's increased awareness made him a target of suspicion. Guards began to notice his prolonged presence near punishment sites, and whispers of watching too closely reached his ears. The Empire's ability to detect defiance, even subtle defiance, was formidable. Adam felt the invisible noose tightening, the stakes escalating with each passing day. Fear had become a constant companion, both paralyzing and sharpening his instincts. In one particularly harrowing encounter, Adam and Hassan came across a young girl accused of theft. Her family, destitute and desperate, had sent her to steal bread to survive. Soldiers seized her, dragging her toward the public square. Adam's impulse to intervene clashed violently with his understanding of the consequences. One false move, one gesture of defiance, could bring him into the same machinery of punishment he had been narrowly spared from weeks earlier. He watched as the girl was bound, her cries piercing the air, and felt the raw injustice of the Empire pressing down upon him. The psychological toll was immense. Adam's nights were restless, haunted by screams and visions of suffering. Layla, ever sensitive to the tension around her, began to fear the shadows, her innocence eroded by the pervasive fear that had entered their home. Their mother, once a source of warmth and guidance, moved with an air of quiet resignation, her eyes reflecting the impossible choices of survival in a city ruled by fear. Adam understood that the personal stakes were now inescapable. The Empire's cruelty had invaded the sanctity of his home, his family, and his very mind. As the days progressed, Adam became increasingly involved in subtle acts of resistance. He began helping those targeted by the Empire in quiet ways, guiding the vulnerable through safer paths, offering temporary shelter, and relaying information about patrols and punishments. Each act, though minor, carried immense risk. The Empire's surveillance was pervasive. Even a small deviation from expected behavior could provoke suspicion. Yet Adam felt compelled by empathy and moral conviction. Survival alone was insufficient. He could not ignore the suffering around him. This period also marked the introduction of new, more insidious forms of punishment. Reports circulated of the cage of shame, where offenders were displayed publicly in iron cages for days, their bodies exposed to heat, cold, and humiliation. Families were punished for the actions of one member, children forced to witness the suffering of their elders. Adam observed these developments with a mix of horror and resolve. He realized that understanding the full extent of the Empire's cruelty was essential for survival and for any hope of meaningful action. One evening, Adam found himself near the central square once more. A public execution was underway. A man accused of betrayal was being hanged, his eyes wide with terror. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the rope tightened, the body swinging with a finality that left an imprint on Adam's mind. This spectacle was more than punishment. It was a demonstration of absolute control, a visceral lesson in fear and obedience. Adam's heart raced as he understood that his observations, his strategies, and even his empathy had to be wielded with caution. The Empire's machinery was precise, relentless, and unforgiving. Yet amidst the escalating terror, Adam's resolve grew. Fear, while omnipresent, had sharpened his understanding, empathy, and strategic thinking. He realized that the rising action of his life was no longer about mere survival. It was about navigating, enduring, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the system that sought to crush him. Every act of observation, every subtle intervention, every choice of caution or defiance became part of a larger unspoken strategy. By the end of this period, Adam was poised on the edge of confrontation. The injustices had become personal, the risks were undeniable, and the emotional stakes had reached a critical peak. He had witnessed enough suffering to understand the true nature of the Empire's power, yet he also recognized the potential for resilience, courage, and calculated resistance. The stage was set for the climax, where fear, injustice, and determination would collide with full force. The city had grown unbearably still, as if the very stones held their breath. Adam moved through the streets with tense, measured steps, his heart hammering against his ribs. The catalyst events, the rising injustices, and the cumulative weight of fear had led him here, to the precipice of confrontation, where choice and fate intertwined with deadly precision. That evening, the square was alive in a grotesque anticipation. A man accused of treason had been brought forth, his hands bound and eyes wide with terror. The crowd pressed close, their faces pale, silent witnesses to the Empire's unrelenting machinery of punishment. Adam felt a cold sweat bead on his forehead. He knew the spectacle would be more than an execution. It would be a demonstration of absolute control, a calculated orchestration designed to instill terror in every observer, and to remind all who dared watch that defiance would be met with merciless precision. As the executioner prepared his instruments, Adam's mind raced. Every lesson from the past weeks, every observation, every subtle act of defiance or empathy culminated in this moment. He realized that the Empire's cruelty was not random, not chaotic. It was deliberate, systematic, and designed to break both body and spirit. The method of punishment was extreme, the kind whispered about in fearful tones. The iron pillar where the condemned was stretched and secured, limbs splayed, while heated irons were applied to his skin in a relentless rhythm of pain and terror. Adam's stomach twisted as he watched. The man's screams rose, raw and unrelenting, cutting through the air like a blade. The crowd flinched in unison, some averting their eyes, others frozen in horrified fascination. Each strike, each crack, each cry was a lesson etched into the minds of the living. Adam felt the chilling truth. The Empire's machinery of cruelty was designed not only to punish but to educate through terror. Yet amid the horror, Adam saw something that no tool of punishment could extinguish: the spark of human resilience. The man, despite agony and despair, lifted his eyes toward the sky, refusing to let fear extinguish his dignity completely. Adam's chest tightened as he recognized the courage it took to endure in the face of such merciless cruelty. The scene ignited something within him, a mix of fear, empathy, and a growing, desperate determination. It was then that the confrontation became personal. A guard, suspicious of Adam's prolonged observation, stepped forward, his gaze sharp, searching for any sign of defiance. Adam froze, realizing that his survival depended on immediate calculation. One wrong move could draw him into the Empire's cruel machinery, making him the next victim of the instruments of terror surrounding the square. His mind raced, weighing risk against instinct, knowledge against panic. From the shadows, Hassan moved subtly, signaling a potential escape route. The two friends exchanged a glance, a silent communication born of weeks of shared observation and trust. Adam understood that hesitation was as dangerous as action. The Empire's precision demanded decisiveness, and now the stakes were life and death. The execution continued, the man's screams reverberating across the square. Adam's chest tightened with every strike. Each moment of observation became unbearable, each heartbeat a drum of dread. He realized that the Empire's power was absolute, yet cracks existed in its armor. Moments of distraction, subtle misalignments, human error. It was within these fissures that survival, perhaps even defiance, could be found. A sudden commotion erupted at the square's edge. A merchant had challenged the guard's actions, protesting the severity of a punishment. In an instant, the Empire's control surged like a tidal wave. Soldiers descended, brandishing weapons, dragging the merchant into the center of the square. Adam's pulse spiked. The chaos, though terrifying, revealed the fragility of fear. When one dared challenge authority, the system responded violently, yet imperfectly. Opportunity and danger were inseparable, intertwined in a delicate dance of survival. Adam knew his moment had come. The culmination of weeks of observation, fear, and moral conflict pressed upon him. To act meant risking everything: life, family, freedom. To remain passive meant becoming complicit, a witness trapped in perpetual terror. The decision was suffocating yet unavoidable. His breath caught as he stepped forward, moving with a calculated mix of caution and resolve, navigating the shadows with precision born of necessity. The crowd's focus remained on the execution, a collective gaze fixed on the agony in the center of the square. Adam used this distraction, slipping through the edges, observing the positioning of guards, noting patterns in their movements, calculating the seconds he had to navigate without drawing attention. Every muscle tensed, every sense sharpened, every heartbeat a reminder that life and death hinged on imperceptible details. Suddenly, the condemned man, in a burst of unexpected defiance, strained against his bindings, letting out a cry that pierced the air. The executioner faltered, momentarily. Thrown off balance, the crowd gasped. In that fraction of a moment, Adam realized the paradox of fear. The Empire relied on terror to maintain control, yet even a single act of courage could fracture the illusion of absolute power. Adam moved decisively. He helped guide the young girl he had seen punished weeks earlier toward a safer corner, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Hassan followed, intercepting a guard who had begun to notice Adam's movement, using distraction and subtle gestures to keep the attention away. The Empire's machinery was precise, yet it relied on human compliance, and in this chaos, cracks appeared. For minutes that felt like hours, Adem navigated the square, the screams of the condemned blending with the murmurs of the crowd and the clanging of weapons. Every movement carried immense risk, every breath a gamble against the Empire's omnipresent cruelty. Yet he pressed on, propelled by fear, empathy, and a determination that had solidified over weeks of oppression. Finally, as the execution reached its terrifying apex, Adem and Hassan found temporary refuge behind a stack of merchant crates. The young girl, eyes wide with terror and awe, clung to Adem. He could feel the tremors of adrenaline, the lingering echoes of screams, and the raw intensity of the moment pressing against him. They had survived, yet the cost was visible in every trembling muscle, every racing heartbeat, every sharp intake of breath. It was in this moment of reprieve that Adem understood the full weight of the Empire's cruelty and the power of resilience. Fear had been a constant, yet within it lay opportunity. The Empire's machinery of punishment was relentless, yet human courage, strategy, and empathy could carve paths through the darkness, however narrow. Adem had been forged in terror, sharpened by observation and tempered by empathy. The rising tension had reached its zenith, and now he stood on the threshold of either survival or annihilation, ready to face whatever the Empire demanded next. The climax closed with the square quieting once more, the condemned hanging by the edge of life and death, the crowd dissipating in stunned silence. Adem, Hassan, and the young girl had survived this immediate ordeal, yet the Empire's shadow remained inescapable. The lessons of fear, cruelty, and resilience were indelible. Adem's journey had reached its most intense point, and the path forward, toward resolution and impact, would demand the integration of everything he had learned: courage, empathy, and the knowledge that survival was both a personal and moral endeavor. The city slowly exhaled, though the tension in its streets remained palpable. Adem walked carefully, each step measured, aware that the Empire's shadow still extended over every corner, every stone, every heartbeat. The events in the square had left a mark, not only on the people who had witnessed them, but on Adem himself. He had faced the full force of the Empire's cruelty, seen the extremes of punishment, and navigated the razor-thin line between survival and death. Layla clung to him as they returned home, her small hands trembling. The innocence that had survived the past weeks now bore the imprint of fear. Adem felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, not just for his own survival, but for those around him, for the vulnerable whose lives were intertwined with his choices. His mother met him at the doorway, her eyes a mixture of relief, worry, and unspoken understanding. Adem realized that while the immediate danger had passed, the Empire's presence remained, and with it, the constant need for vigilance. The young girl he had saved in the square remained close, her trust a fragile yet powerful reminder of what could be preserved even in the face of terror. Adem's empathy, honed through weeks of observation, strategy, and subtle acts of defiance, had allowed him to protect life, to intervene and to assert a measure of humanity in a city ruled by cruelty. These small victories, though minor in the face of the Empire's overwhelming machinery, were profound in their moral significance. Adem reflected on the events that had brought him here: the catalyst incident, the relentless observations of injustice, the subtle interventions, and finally, the climax in the square. All had shaped him. Fear had been a constant teacher, cruelty a brutal instructor, and survival an unforgiving test. Yet through it all, he had discovered resilience, courage, and the profound importance of empathy. The city's machinery of punishment had sought to crush his spirit, yet it had forged him instead into a more aware, more determined individual. The aftermath was not without consequence. Whispers of Adem's actions began circulating, subtle hints of defiance that had escaped the immediate notice of the guards. He realized that even minor acts of resistance could carry both risk and impact. The Empire, though relentless, was operated by humans, flawed, imperfect, and susceptible to subtle disruption. Adem had seen the cracks, understood their potential, and recognized that survival was intertwined with the capacity to act thoughtfully within the system of oppression. Over the following days, Adem and Hassan worked quietly to assist others. They guided families away from particularly harsh patrols, offered shelter to those recently punished, and provided guidance to children and elders navigating the treacherous streets. Each act, while modest in scale, carried immense significance. They became small beacons of hope in a city where fear dominated. Adam understood that heroism did not always manifest in grand gestures. Sometimes it existed in quiet courage, moral clarity, and the preservation of humanity amid inhumanity. The Empire's cruelty, however, remained ever present. Adam could hear the distant screams of punishment echoing across the city, reminders that the machinery of control had not faltered, that injustice remained as potent as ever. Yet these reminders, rather than paralyzing him, reinforced his understanding. Fear was a tool, cruelty a method, but human resilience could persist. Each person who survived, who acted with courage, who preserved empathy, became a subtle challenge to the Empire's absolute power. Adam spent nights reflecting on his journey, the lessons learned from observation, fear, and direct confrontation. The climax had shown him the extremes of cruelty, the fragility of human life under systemic oppression, and the extraordinary power of courage in the face of imminent danger. Survival was not merely a passive act. It was a combination of awareness, empathy, and decisive action. The city, though governed by fear, had taught him that human spirit could endure, adapt, and subtly resist, even in the darkest conditions. The impact of his experiences rippled through the small community around him. Layla's trust, his mother's quiet strength, her son's camaraderie, and the lives of those they assisted all reflected the profound moral consequences of action versus inaction. Adam realized that while he could not dismantle the Empire's machinery, he could influence lives in meaningful ways, preserve dignity where possible, and demonstrate that fear, though pervasive, need not entirely consume the human spirit. As he looked out over the city from the rooftop of their small home, Adam observed the streets below. Life continued, constrained yet persistent, a testament to endurance in the face of oppression. The Empire's shadow remained, imposing and unyielding, yet within it flickered countless small acts of resistance, courage, and empathy. Adam understood that survival and moral action were inseparable. To live without conscience, without awareness, was to surrender entirely to the machinery of cruelty. The resolution of Adam's journey did not erase the fear, nor did it absolve the cruelty he had witnessed. Instead, it illuminated a path forward, a recognition that human resilience, empathy, and courage could persist even under the most oppressive circumstances. He had faced the Empire's machinery of punishment, navigated its threats, and emerged with a deeper understanding of both its power and its limitations. In the end, Adam's story became a reflection of broader truths. Fear can control, cruelty can dominate, but human spirit, moral courage, and empathy endure. The Empire's punishments were brutal, its hierarchy rigid, its cruelty precise. But within the cracks, in the quiet acts of resistance, in the choices of those who dared to act morally, there existed hope. Adam understood that the cycle of oppression could be endured, navigated, and challenged, not necessarily dismantled in a single act, but influenced in countless subtle ways that preserved life, dignity, and conscience. The final reflection settled heavily on his mind. What does it mean to survive with morality intact in a world designed to break you? Adam had found a partial answer. Survival required courage, awareness, empathy, and the wisdom to act when opportunity arose. Fear would remain, cruelty would persist, but human spirit could endure and sometimes, even in the smallest acts of courage, quietly defy the Empire's shadow. And so, the city continued, governed by power and fear, yet punctuated by subtle defiance. Adam, hardened yet aware, carried forward the lessons of injustice, courage, and empathy, knowing that his choices mattered, not just for himself, but for every life intersecting with his. The Empire's shadow remained, but so did the spark of resilience, flickering quietly, persistently, enduring against the dark. Step into the shadows of the Empire, where justice and horror are one, and nothing is as it seems.